Mine started automatically. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Uranus in the Taurus part two, in which we look at Uranus transiting through all 12 houses. As you can see on your screen tonight, we're going to look at the first house and the second house. And I just got to tell somebody it's snowing outside in Rapid City, South Dakota. When we set up this series for Chiron and Aries and Uranus and Taurus, it was kind of like, I want to do it a little ahead of time, even though it's not that far ahead. I said, I want to do it a little ahead of time so that, I can get outside this spring, because those of you who do not know me, I love to garden. Well, I think every time I'm teaching one of these webinars, Mother Nature's decided to come through with rain. Well, we haven't really had rain yet. It's snowing, and it's supposed to snow Wednesday night into Thursday as well. So stay tuned. I'll let you all know what the weather's doing up here in the Northern Plains. Here's our housekeeping slide. You can learn evolutionary astrology with us 3 different ways. You can listen to our free weekly audio podcasts. You can subscribe to our astro library, 3 different sections: 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. And then, of course, if you really want to dive into evolutionary astrology, we have our course materials, 3 different segments, as you see there on your screen. You need more information, you know how to contact us. Here's Uranus dates in Taurus. As many of the outer planets, they don't always do this, but a lot of times they do. They'll dip into the new sign, they'll retrograde back to the old sign for a while before they return to that new sign, in this case Taurus, where they'll remain. I should say that as we go through this part of the Uranus series, I'm going to assume that you have participated in Uranus and Taurus through the archetypes and the cycles. We're not going to repeat a lot of that information. We're going to try and just really work with the forecasting of these archetypes. I will say Uranus takes 84 years to go around the zodiac. It spends approximately 7 years in each sign. And so that's how we are looking at finishing up Uranus and Aries and moving into Uranus and Taurus. And 2018 will be a back and forth year, as you can see. It'll go into Taurus for 6 months, and then it'll dip back into Aries for 6 months. So it'll really be a back and forth energy this year. Now, here's the bullet points of some of the things that we looked at in more detail with Uranus and Taurus. There is an intent to revolutionize self-reliance via exposing any of our insecurities. There will be an evolving inner relationship with ourself and our environment. Taurus is the inner side of Venus, which rules it. Of course, there can be all kinds of sexuality upsets, shakeups, revolutions, all kinds of sexual news when Uranus goes into Taurus and through its time period into Taurus. And of course, this was first started by Jupiter moving into Scorpio last fall, which is the opposite sign of Taurus. And Uranus in Taurus, of course, is going to revolutionize our relationship to resources. We'll work with that one specifically over these next 12 houses and 6 webinars. And what it's meant to do in the long term then in this resource relationship is develop a long-term potential where we create new talents that turn into jobs, career, and of course the ability to accumulate resources in new ways. Some of the distortions of Uranus and Taurus can be making a minimal effort with change, that laziness and inertia, That then will create those Scorpio polarity confrontations and rug ripped out underneath us. There can also be manipulation or possessiveness. We want someone else to do the work for us. There can be withdrawal into the hermit. There can be a hoarding nature, and that will be related to feeling insecure and we never have enough no matter how much we have. We can also see that there can be some excessive materialism in the world. We'll probably hear about this in the news in various ways over the next 7 years. And of course, Taurus following Aries' birth. Taurus is the survival. So one of the distortions is the inability to survive, where we starve. And if you're paying any attention to climate change, you're already seeing where they're starting to forecast or project all of the various species we could see dying off on planet Earth, especially over the next 7 years, with, again, Taurus ruling survivalship and Uranus upsetting the apple cart, so to speak. Now here's the Scorpio polarity, and this will be intensified whenever Uranus goes through its 5-month retrograde cycle, which it does once a year. Scorpio will create the necessary cataclysms to expand our individual and collective perspectives of the universe. Taurus is fixed earth. I like my little cocoon or cave. I feel safe in there. I don't want to go over to that polarity and expand out of my safe little universe. So Scorpio will also bring the upsets, the good old confrontations, as we will call it, that forces us to consider different perspectives of ourselves and of our relationship to the universe. Scorpio will bring about resource upsets, redistributions. As many of you know, we have an extreme inequality of wealth accumulation again, somewhat like we had in what we will call the Gilded Age, the turn of the last century, and it created a real strong populist movement to have a more equitable sharing of resources. And as that happened, then we saw a lot of prosperity come along in the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s somewhat, and then it started changing again. The Scorpio polarity will have us triggering ethical debates over technology. Scorpio is shared sexuality with another. And look at all the gene manipulation we can do right now. Look at the ways in, which we can be putting 3D printed body parts onto ourselves. All kinds of different, morality and ethical debates can come up. And of course, because Taurus is self-sex, Scorpio is shared sex, we can see the sexual scandals and the STD contagions. And the Scorpio being fixed water will especially have us recognizing the necessity of clean water and having a healthy and clean environment, just as part of the polarity to Taurus surviving. Some of these distortions, we can see power grabs, we can see outright stealing of money and resources, we can see the betrayals in relationships or betrayals with resources, we can try to game the system, we can see excessive misuse of money and resources. It'll be interesting as Uranus moves into Taurus and we see some of these retrogrades. I mean, I look at these distortion words right here and I can't help but think of our current president and the issues around corruption, etc. Stay tuned. But let's move on and look at this from a more personal perspective for many of us. Now, I wanted to put this slide in as we start to consider Uranus. Uranus and Pluto have a 127-year relationship. And so it was back in the 1930s, in the early 30s, that Uranus had last quarter squares to Pluto. And so almost everyone who's alive today, if they were born before 1965, they have Uranus either last quarter or balsamic phase to Pluto. And this means that they're trying to bring to the surface old traumas from childhood, from past lives, old trauma patterns that they're trying to become aware of in order to heal and resolve. If you were born after 1965, during 1965, you got to look at the actual dates to see if it's a balsamic conjunction or if Uranus is here compared to Pluto, and it's a new phase conjunction, all right? But after 1965, Uranus was either first quarter phase or crescent phase to Pluto. And again, we might remember we had those 7 waxing squares in 2012 to 2015 between Pluto and Capricorn to Uranus in Aries. We've now moved on. We're going to move into this biseptile aspect in the first quarter phase. I refer you to the Uranus and Taurus cycles webinar if you want more information on that. Point is, if you have Uranus waxing to Pluto, okay, you're trying to break free from the old traumas. You really have an intensity to want to liberate yourself. Now, Uranus waxing Pluto doesn't mean you can't still bring trauma into your experience. You can bring up another layer. You can re-imprint layers. And Uranus waning Pluto doesn't mean you can't break free, okay? But in general, Uranus waning Pluto, I want to heal it. Uranus waxing Pluto, I want to break free and move forward in new ways. So every natal chart we look at during this series will have Uranus either waning towards Pluto, or it will be waxing away from Pluto. Now, looking specifically at Uranus and Taurus transiting through the first house relates to Aries. It is the active polarity, cardinal modality, fire element. Active is energy moving out from the center. Cardinal is initiation, jumping in. And of course, fire is the element of spirit and that sense of destiny that something that I've got to do and create. First house, brand new cycle whenever any planets cross the ascendant and move into that first house. And of course, the slower moving the planet, the slower moving the cycle of initiation. So what Uranus and Taurus transiting through the first house will look at here is an intense need to liberate from old conditioning patterns and evolve my values, Taurus. Now, just like we said on that last slide, Uranus is the archetype of trauma, and it's always trying to break free from the trauma of the past. So those old conditioning patterns include that trauma. I don't want to be known. I don't want to know myself by what came before. I want to start over. I want to be somebody new. I want to change. I want to do something different. Well, what? Well, Taurus is values. Well, what is important to me? What is it that I value about myself? That's going to then create that leading edge of how we're going to move forward into the unknown future. And as we say with Uranus, you pay attention to the element of repetition with future-orientated messages. If it comes up into consciousness all on its own, again, 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 it's where your own soul is wanting to move forward and move towards. Now, Uranus and Taurus through the first house can create a fair amount of insecurity. Insecurity can exist in the first house regardless because it's birthing something new. The past, no matter how dysfunctional it is, can represent security because we know it. So Uranus moving through Taurus here can be quite insecure. It can also come because there's this need for action. Mars rules Aries in the first house. I want to do, I want to be, I want to act. I don't want to sit still. And Taurus goes, oh, but I just want to sit still and be comfortable and secure. And so there's this push-pull that goes on with this house transit between the need to be secure and the need to break free and do something new. Now, if you happen to have an Aries rising or ascendant, you will be able to break free a little easier because you instinctively came in to do that, and that Aries rising matches the first house. If you have a Taurus rising, it will limit those actions. It'll really create more of a security tug. And when you make a leap or an effort to move forward, it can be limited to what feels safe and secure rather than busting out and heading off on the great adventure. If the Taurus risings limit this to what feels secure, then that Scorpio polarity can kick in and really create some intensity of confrontation or rug being pulled out according to how you need to break free and move forward. And of course, this is going to be the initiation of all kinds of opportunities to create new talents. Taurus in the second house rule our natural talents that we use to create and bring in resources or money for food, clothing, shelter, exchanges, etc. So Uranus in Taurus going through the first house is like, well, what new jobs, what new careers, what new talents do I want to create? What will become somewhat important here, and this is where Taurus can lend a hand, is whatever the new efforts are that we're going to make in regards to job and career, we've got to learn how to make a consistent effort in order to create something. Because the first house can get excited, it'll make an beginning effort, and then boredom hits. Or, this is too much work. Or there'll be something that first house just wants to go off in another direction. And so to build up an accumulation of resources, including money, we're going to, again, really fine tune what's my values, what's important to me, so that as we move along creating new talents or expanding talents that we have that have risen into consciousness, we can just, again, consistent effort with it so we get somewhere. This house transit will bring a strong desire for freedom in every area of life so that we can just move and act in any direction we want to go. Well, the polarity is the seventh house, which is where we start to evolve into relationships, including intimate, family, career. With Uranus, it will always involve like-minded friends, etc. So this intense need for freedom with Uranus in the first house can create all kinds of Scorpio polarity confrontations in our relationships. You can see relationships begin, end, and in essence, with this house transit, and you're in, say, intimate partnership or relationship with someone, there needs to be lots of freedom in the relationship in order for the relationship to evolve and change as much as the person who has the transit in the first house evolve and change as well. If Uranus in Taurus first house is too codependent, the partner may leave us. If the partner is too codependent upon us, we may want to end the relationship. Scenarios will be all over the place. But in essence, both people have to be independent, and they have to learn that Taurian self-reliance, so they minimize what they project on to the other by way of expecting something out of the relationship. Seventh house polarity is projections and expectations. Well, I thought you were going to be this way in the relationship. No, that's not me. That's what you're pushing on to me. I don't want to be that way. And it can come back to us as well, being the one with the first house transit by the partner. Resources can fluctuate no matter what house Uranus and Taurus transits through. So in essence, we have to look at every house transit as if resources are going to fluctuate. And what can happen with the first house transit, and that first house impulsiveness to act and go and do this and do that and do this and do that. If we're not making that consistent effort, it may have an effect on our resources. If we're clinging to a security, it may have an effect on our resources by way of, losing our job if we're meant to be evolving into something new, or maybe we're meant to initiate being an entrepreneur. And if we don't make that effort ourselves, the universe can appear to bring it to us from the outside. What we need to always, always remember here with Uranus and Taurus, I am my own resource. What is it that I am going to create for myself over the next 7 years? Now, of course, some of the distortion here could be overspending, the first house impulses, buy with a card. Or it can be perhaps that with Taurus, we're all going to learn to simplify our values. With Uranus and Taurus, I think there will be a collective evolution of learning to value less material stuff. As we spoke earlier, the United States has 5% of the world's population. We spend 25% of the world's resources. The rest of the world cannot live like we do. Who says we in the United States can continue to live this way while the rest of the world goes with less? And if you're paying any attention politically, we have an extremely impulsive president who is very protectionistic and nationalistic. We had the first country slap tariffs back on us. We could see some trade wars. We could see some real things happening with resources here. So first house, part of the new values is, what are the resources I really need in my world? Sometimes first house Plutos, they can be minimalist. They don't need any resources at all. Did I say first house Plutos? I don't remember what I said. with this Uranus and Taurus transiting through the first house, it may lead to wanting less and less to do with resources. Lots of natal planets in the first house, or we, raising Leroy and I, we have a young adult who's a first house Pluto. And he can get by with not a lot of stuff, which might be valuable for him in his life. It doesn't mean he doesn't get impulsive spending money. Does. Now, you can also see that there could be sudden increases in resources in the first house transit, and that would mean there were prior efforts made with Uranus in the previous houses, or there were prior efforts made in past lives, and it's now time to receive from your spiritual escrow account. Now, distortions, many of them similar to what we spoke before, but there can be a withdrawing in upon ourselves. I don't need relationships. I don't want a relationship. They're too painful. When the first house needs to participate in relationships for the feedback on itself, and it can give feedback to the partner as well. This house transit, you might take on more work than you can actually do. And because the first house is so self-oriented, self-focused, or self-centered, we can hoard our resources from fear of not having enough, for example. We can also, as we spoke earlier, lack the initiative to make all these new beginnings. Now, with these houses, not a be-all, end-all. We could spend hours, but I'm just thought I'm going to just try and put a couple of slides up for most of the bullet points as we look at this house transit. We do have a volunteer for the first house, and so at this point, I would like to questions from anybody before we move on to our volunteer. If you have any questions, you're always welcome to interact on the Q&A board with Leroy. And he'll unmute you if you want to ask questions live of me or etc. And if not, we'll see if we have our volunteer.
Yeah, the board is is clear, so I'll unmute.
Volunteer.
Hello.
Hello.
And Leroy, how are you?
Oh, good. It is so wonderful to speak to you again.
Yeah.
Hola.
Yeah, hola. Our volunteer moved to Hawaii a couple of years ago, but she happens to be from the northern plains. And once upon a time, we knew each other through astrology. Didn't you come to a beginning astrology class that I did in my little house on 4th Street?
Yes, I did. Yes.
I remember that. And weren't my... Go ahead.
Your astrology career since way back when.
Oh, yes. And if I'm remembering correctly, didn't I have my little twin Manx kittens? Do you remember that?
Yes, you did. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and they were running around crazy.
Yeah. Well, they made it to 15 years and 17 years. I had to put one of them down. And that you probably, I don't know if you even remember this, but I also had that black and white cat that I took in. All three of those cats came into the marriage with me, helped raise the kid. The cats lived to be 15, and 17 years old.
Wow.
And the reason I remember that is because, this was back in the cassette tape days. And so I would sell copies of my astrology introductory workshop on cassette tape. And everybody would comment on the kittens meowing in the background. So thank you for letting me do memory lane, okay? And by the way, I have a treat for you.
Oh,
we did not get a volunteer for the second house, so we are using your chart for both examples. Okay?
great.
Yeah, lucky you. Well, let me just read a little bit of your environmental conditionings. And so, obviously, you know, we have a female volunteer. She was raised with strict, oppressive parents. Mom was a fundamentalist. Dad was a self-proclaimed hedonistic. She has two younger siblings. A fair amount of poverty when she was growing up. She went into some rebellion. Oh, imagine this with all this Aquarius in this chart. Early pregnancy in which she was forced to give up the baby. She became pregnant again with her first son, and was forced to marry at 16. She was divorced at 18. She had a second marriage that lasted longer. And that there she had a daughter with that, and then she had a brief third marriage for 1 year with a guy who was quite abusive. Doesn't really feel that she has close friends except perhaps her four-leggeds. Most of her relationships have been short term. She seems to get on a 2 year cycle and she gets restless. 2 years is Mars, by the way. Mars, 2 years to go around the chart. She's currently in a relationship for 1 year. They just moved in with each other and signed a 1 year lease. She has a bachelor's in English and she went on and got her law degree. So she's an attorney in family law and estate planning. And the first of this year, she left the firm she was working with and she put out her own shingle working for herself. And of course, she has a long history in spiritual studies and background, including Wiccan and, of course, some astrology and probably perhaps all of the above, as many of us have done, being in metaphysics for a lot of years. I want to just briefly point out for everybody, as we had talked earlier, we have a fifth house Pluto in Virgo. We're dealing with 1964 birth. Uranus balsamic Pluto. Okay, we're looking about 5 degrees away from Pluto. So it's a conjunction, but it's a balsamic conjunction. The closer Uranus gets to natal Pluto, okay, the more it signifies we're going to bring in all the past life trauma patterns, repeat them, bring in the people we have trauma with, re-meet them in order to wake up, become conscious, break free. Now, we see that there are 5 planets, I include Chiron, in the 11th house. There are 5 planets in Aquarius with Mercury being in Aquarius 10th. And Mercury rules Uranus by sign Virgo. Sun rules Uranus by 5th house. And Sun's in Aquarius and 11th, the double Aquarius signature. Now, lots I can say, but what I typically do volunteer is, you know, I'd like to hear from you first because you just saw those last 2 slides where we kind of bullet pointed a few things. And, you know, you've had Uranus come over this ascendant and be in the first house for a few years. So would you like to share any of your thoughts on how you've experienced Uranus in the first house so far?
I have had a lot of breaking free in the last few years. Moving to Hawaii in 2015, breaking free from living in South Dakota for years or having connections in South Dakota. And just recently quitting my job and going out on my own, very scary, very just breaking free. And it felt so good after I did it. It was such a buildup going towards getting away from my job I was in. And then when I broke free, it was just such a relief. And I was watching what the moon was doing and that sort of thing at the time, and um, it seemed like I had a lot of moon influence, but I'm seeing also it was Uranus
Mm-hmm.
me to get out of there and do my own thing.
Mm-hmm. Uranus went over your ascendant here, 2014. It went over your Jupiter, 2015. So it was like a 1-2 punch that gave you the courage to just initiate something entirely new. Did you get intuitive hits to move? What led you to move to Hawaii?
Well, my daughter got married at Turtle Bay on Oahu in 2011. My son also moved to Hawaii in 2011. So my daughter, my son-in-law, and I, while we were in Hawaii for my daughter's wedding, decided to get on a 5-year plan to move to Hawaii. And I was a little bit ahead of schedule, but I went ahead and moved. And so most of the things I was doing from 2011 until I finally moved in 2015, I always had in the back of my mind, this is I'm moving towards Hawaii. I had to do advanced care for my dog. I had to have a rabies titer test for her and wait 4 months and, various things to make sure that she didn't have to be in quarantine when we got here. So it was a lot of planning and doing what I had to do to be where I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. Uranus moved into Aries 2010-11. It would have went over your Venus then when the initiation of the plan came about. So there's the Venus values with Uranus going over Venus and saying, I'm ready to move. I want to do something new, and I want a different climate. So anything else you want to share with Uranus through the ascendant?
Yes, part of the preparation for my move in 2014 was breaking up with my then boyfriend because he was not on board to go to Hawaii. So that was it was fall of 2014. So that was a split in preparation, doing what I had to do to get over here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gotcha. All right, so I'll start adding a few things in, and you are welcome to ask questions anytime you want. You're welcome to interject anytime you want as well. I'll try and make sure I check in with you. For those who are looking, we have Jupiter square the nodes here. We also have the ascendant square the nodes. We even have the nodes applying to squares with Venus. And so part of the Jupiter square the nodes, that's always skip steps in EA's language. And with Jupiter, it's going to be skipping steps with initiations. And Jupiter in Aries, and Jupiter in the beginning of the chart can be start, stop, do it again, do it again, do it again. Okay? And so with Uranus moving over this ascendant, okay, it was a huge opportunity to heal this desire and need for freedom right here. So that's a little bit of the review. Now, as Uranus is going to move into Taurus, and as you can see, it's going to spend half of its 7-year transit almost in Taurus. It'll be about 3 years in the first house. It'll be about 4 years in the second house. And so with this moving through the first house, with Taurus, as you can see, she just left her firm. We don't even have Uranus and Taurus yet, and she's already making that effort to work towards working for herself, her own talents, to provide her own resources. What Uranus is going to ask then is, as we saw in some of those previous slides, is making a consistent effort with doing your own work and being your own boss. And at the same time, pay attention to any future-orientated messages that say, I need to shift my work a little bit in this direction, or I need to shift my work in that direction. Working for yourself, it may cause you to be a little busy, a little sometimes overwork. You might have to really pace yourself with that. Okay. Um, and yet, at the same time, it's quite possible with this house transit that there might be something that comes along that you add on. And I'm not saying you're not going to continue to be in the legal profession, but you might add on a third area where you are practicing law, for instance. Okay.
Well, you say that.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I am really wanting to add in to my life making glass jewelry.
Oh.
Which is, yeah, it's like not associated with the legal profession at all, but I was looking at getting a glass kiln, and I mentioned it to my son, and lo and behold, they were too expensive, and lo and behold, he got me one for Christmas.
Oh.
But I haven't had time to set it up until just about last week. I set it up. So now I am wanting to do this glass jewelry, and I don't know if it's going to be an area where I make money or anything like that, but it's just something I feel driven to do at this time.
Well, fifth house Plutos are very creative. And with Uranus balsamic Pluto, all right, as you do your own personal healing, which we'll do all this lifetime, there can be latent creative talents that you've had from the past, because the fifth house, all the fire houses, first Aries, fifth Leo, ninth Sag, they're known, fire can be known as creativity, but especially the fifth house Leo, this is the house of creativity. And so there can have been, there can be trauma around that, where as you've wanted to be, more than just a spouse and a parent, okay, as you've wanted to create, it could easily be that you've had past lives in which that wasn't allowed to happen, because South Node Capricorn 10th, you had to be responsible. And there's karma between the parent and the child within your own soul. Okay, I got to do what I need to do. I don't get to, have time to really work on myself, and yet you're going to be working on yourself throughout this lifetime. I mean, you became a parent at a pretty young age. And so it just kind of could have easily consumed a lot of your early years being that spouse and parent, and yet that yearning for creativity would have been here. Now, having these two planets retrograde, all right, the retrograde means these two planets point towards the polarity house, which is the 11th house. And as you can see, you have Chiron pretty tight opposition to Pluto, the soul. And so there will be woundedness around this creativity. There's a lot in this signature right here with all of these Aquarian planets. As you probably remember, in evolutionary astrology, Uranus, 11th house, and Aquarius are the signatures for trauma. To have that many planets in Aquarius and in the 11th house, it can feel like your life, especially early on, 5th house as a child, early environment, North Node in the 4th house. When a planet is square the nodes, halfway between each of the nodes, both nodes have past life patterning. So this North Node in Cancer, early environment has just as much to do with your past lives as the South Node. And so trauma as a child, trauma in the early environment, it's not been just this lifetime that's been this chaotically traumatic. It is a pattern within your soul. And the lesson for a Leo soul or 5th house Pluto is the objectivity of the 11th house. So there's two things that go on here. First of all, you can feel things so intensely, okay? And Jupiter and Aries on the ascendant reifies that. You can feel it so intensely, okay, that sometimes it's like it's hard to step back and be objective about it. And yet that's what the universe teaches you. All of us will have shock and trauma because we all have Uranus, 11th house, and Aquarius in our chart. And it's like when you're involved in a car accident, and all of a sudden that 30 seconds seems to take 3 minutes. It's just like there's time stands still, and everything happens so expandedly, time wise. That can be a lot of what goes on for you. And when those moments happen, those are important opportunities to really go, okay, source, why is this happening? What does it mean? And answers will come through in whatever way they need to. Now, the other pattern that can go on, even though you have this 5th house Pluto, which the 5th house is known as subjectivity, it has some reiteration with Uranus balsamic, so it's back and forth between being subjective and objective. This much energy in the Aquarius and 11th house can have a second Uranian pattern going on, whereas it just feels like you're outside the bubble all the time. It's like you're always with the kid with your nose up against the glass looking in at the candy store, but you're never in the candy store. And sometimes with that much Aquarian energy, if there's been so much trauma, you're not in your body. And sometimes then the re-imprinting of the trauma is to get you in your body. Following this, volunteer?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And and I think a lot of this relationship trauma when you were growing up and early on, yes, it was repeating, okay, but it was also to try and, get you in your body. To have that Aquarian energy get out of its head, air modal or air element, okay, to get out of your head and to make efforts to kind of, be in your body from time to time. Now, I think Uranus in Taurus transiting through the first house, a lot of its initiation is going to be about grounding yourself literally in your body. And oh, by the way, while it is in Taurus, it's going to make a square to Mercury, and Mercury goes retrograde at 2 degrees Taurus, 34 minutes. So it's going to, when Uranus turns stationary retrograde in the beginning of August, it will be at an exact square to your Mercury. You will definitely want to pay attention to the messages that come for you in early August as Uranus gets ready to go retrograde. But then as it moves through this second house and slowly squares, even by sign, all of these planets, there's so much you're going to learn about yourself. And I would say again, you could do, I mean, I know you said you'd been to a yoga retreat, meditation retreat. I would say physically in your body. So, whether it's the gym or whether it's yoga or whether it's your walks along the beach, whatever it is, the more that you can ground in the body with this transit, the healthier it will be for you, the less impulsive you will be, and the more you'll be able to ground yourself in freedom. Part of the trauma that could come from these planets in these fixed houses, okay, 5th and 11th, you literally have 7 planets, and you can add on Neptune in a fixed house if you want to. 2nd, 5th, 8th, 11th is fixed modality. There could have been lifetimes in which part of your trauma was literally being imprisoned, contained. And so this is really going to be about grounding in your freedom to the point that you feel free to be in relationship. Okay? And so anytime, any type of Scorpio 7th house polarity comes up in regards to relationships, your response with Uranus can bring in those lightning bolt messages. What's going on here? What does this mean? What is it teaching me about myself? And what is it teaching me about how I participate in relationships? Yes, you can have restlessness because of this Jupiter Aries ascendant here, but it's also due to feeling locked up and contained for so many lifetimes. The child bride, which you repeated again this lifetime.
Yeah.
And you may have been doing it rebelliously, thinking it would give you freedom, and all it did was lock you up. And
Yes.
and so there's this huge expansion of knowledge and wisdom that Uranus is bringing to the surface for you to learn about yourself. And as it continues to bring up the bits and pieces of information about self, Uranus and Taurus, you're really wanting to ground in your own values. What's important to me? Jupiter, what do I believe? What do I want to do for myself? And on the broadest levels, it should be that you can be free to do whatever you want within a relationship. And so, of course, have you gotten to the relationship yet that gives you freedom? Who knows? Time will tell. Does this make sense?
Yes. Yes. It's a
Okay.
lot of
Questions with what I'm saying?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
Understand.
Checking in with the board. Anybody has questions? Again, you can sure do the Q&A with Leroy here in regards to this. So we know consistent effort with the career initiations, openness to other areas of creativity and talents, okay? And you are, I always look at it when we have some new creative talent that comes along. Many times it's just something that brings us joy or that we want to learn. And it may or may not be something that brings us resources in the current life. It can easily be something that becomes a talent that we utilize in a future life. So with your creativity with the glass making, go for it. Okay. And again, yes, yes, yes. Uranus and Taurus, first house, evolving the relationship you have with yourself. However, recognizing that you will still be participating in intimate relationships and learning from them the rest of your life. Okay? All right.
So one thing that I'm thinking of is um, my current relationship. How do I say this? It's not very sexual, and
Mm-hmm.
so the self sex I thought was an interesting thing for you to talk about, because that maybe there's too much information that that comes into play more.
Not in the world.
So
Not in the world of EA, okay? Pluto rules Scorpio. We don't worry. Most people who participate in these webinars, you can share as much as you feel comfortable with. Well, you know that
yeah,
Uranus and Taurus in the first house, it is about you pleasuring yourself with life, pleasuring yourself with work and creativity, pleasuring your own body, and taking that out of the shameful closet. And so, can partner be comfortable with you in that arena? I will share one simple little tidbit. Leroy and I have a composite south node in Taurus. And, we talked early on in our relationship, and I just said, listen, you know me, and, Leroy's become as well informed with evolutionary astrology as anybody else who's out there in that world. But, I said early on in our relationship, honey, I think it's going to be important with the South Node in Taurus that we each continue to pleasure ourselves as well as enjoy each other. And so, yes, if you're bringing up that subject, wondering, that is definitely the signature there. And it could work to create some excitement over here in the relationship. And so as Uranus moves into Taurus, moving through that first house, and even when it continues into the second house, increases that signature. If the sexuality is emerging as a very strong value for you, and it's not there in that relationship, making the effort to speak about it, bring it into the relationship, or perhaps if it doesn't work out, there may be a need that is something important for you in a relationship. Was there a question? Am I responding hopefully?
yes, that is helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. And the other thing that can happen with Uranus here, and when it moves into Taurus in the first house, is the sexual urges can be quite sporadic and intense. It's just like it comes on, I got to deal with it. Okay, I feel better. And
Mm-hmm.
and so sometimes it has to be something that you're just going to need to be responsible for in the moment. And then sometimes it'll work out where it comes up, it's there, and it's, there through the relationship. You can be observing this over the next 3 years with Uranus and Taurus, okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, if you think of anything else that pops up for you, jot it down on paper, okay? Because I can go back to that first house, or we can move forward into the second. But probably what I'll do right now at this point is I'll have Leroy mute you again, okay? And I'm going to move on to Uranus and Taurus transiting through the second house, and we'll bring you back on live once we get through the next 2 slides. And so here, as we start to look at Uranus in Taurus moving through the second house, of course, it's its own house. Taurus, second house, both ruled by Venus, both the inner side of Venus. And so here we have passive polarity, which means energy moving inward or back to the center. Here we have that fixed modality, which means modality, our actions are wanting to be sustained and consistent, persevere. And of course, it's the earth element, and earth is physical. And so this is why it comes into the materialization of the resources that we need in order to sustain ourselves. Everything we've talked about in the Uranus and Taurus Part 1 archetypes and cycles will be active with Uranus and Taurus transiting the house Taurus naturally relates to. Some bullet points. There will be a complete upheaval of one's value system, including our values around resources, meaning our values with money, our values with material items, our values with whatever we perceive we need to survive: food, clothing, shelter, and flourish. Remember, and again, all this is going to be relative to the evolutionary state of consciousness in the soul. And so remember how we spoke with the consensus 7 out of 10 souls. It's, how many BMWs can I have? Or, how many, how much stuff becomes the security. Relative to the individuating state of consciousness, 2 out of 10 people, we learn to recognize I am my resource. I can create whatever I need to survive and flourish. And of course, in the spirituated state, approximately 1 out of 10 souls, it's recognizing the ultimate resource, universal source, and being able to trust source to provide for whatever it is we need in life. So, as Uranus transits through that second house, and it creates the upheaval with resources. It can be the same thing as we spoke before. If the job goes south, it may be because you need to learn a new talent, some new area of creativity. It may be because you need to go to work for yourself. It's not just going to happen randomly. There's something to learn here. And anytime we have topsy-turvy with our resources, it can throw us inward. Uranus in Taurus, passive polarity, will turn us inward. Uranus in Taurus transiting through the second house, turn us inward. And that essence then, turning inward, is so that we deepen our self-reliance. I am not my stuff. And it's okay to have things even individuating and spirituating. I love my big 4-bedroom house. I love being able to have a place, that my family can come stay at when family comes to town. My side, Leroy's side. So try not to get into too much judgments around where we're at. When we, all souls that dual desire, separating and returning desires, as we naturally exhaust the separating desires, lover, job, house, this, that, any, whatever the manifestation is, as we exhaust the separating desires, that desire to know source naturally returns. And so we can go through a natural progression of releasing material things. Yes, Uranus and Taurus will broaden it collectively for everybody, but in this house transit or in any of the house transits with Uranus and Taurus, we still get to have my values. And so there will be a lot of internalization of what we value, and self-reliance, self-worth, self-love, self-acceptance, all of those self-dash words will have us pondering these things with this transit. Now, because it's going to be Taurus in the second house, our survival instincts will be extremely acute and aware. There will be some souls on the planet with Uranus and Taurus through the second house, and there might be some climate change event that comes along, and it really teaches them what's important. And, it can happen anywhere. They're saying in the next few decades, flooding in Miami will be an every other day event. There was just an article recently about how, Boston had, I don't know if they had strong storm surges recently or something, but they were talking about how, these major weather events in Boston and basically all up and down the Atlantic will become more and more often. And so this house transit, part of the talents and new creativity, there can be those geniuses or scientists or inventors that somebody comes through and creates something else that's better to survive with. So those survival instincts can help protect oneself and keep oneself alive. It can help you decide, I need this and I don't need all that crap. It can have you learning. I mean, this when there are slow moving transits through the second house, they almost always will represent learning new talents and creativity, learning new ways to provide resources for yourself. I was reminding Leroy, well, right here, long-term potential to develop new talents into jobs, career, and resource accumulations. When Uranus transited into my second house, I quadrupled my income. I was given another job opportunity that just landed in my lap. I was able to leave. I actually left the 8 to 5 world about 2-3 months ahead before that and said, I'm going to try and make it as an astrologer, because I was, about half time, 3/4 time as an astrologer. And I was just having my conversations with God Goddess and going, I probably am going to have to figure out something else to do besides just astrology without going back into the 8 to 5 world, so that I can really, so that I can flourish and not just survive. I have, my second house cusp is 29 degrees Aquarius. And so Uranus was going between Aquarius and Pisces, and I was able to bring in a metaphysical occupation that I figured it must have been karmically there from the past, but it really allowed me to develop and grow more in the metaphysical world as well. So there's my example with Uranus through the second house. Now, it doesn't mean that it was a nice, easy, straight income. Up, down, up, down, up, down. Uranus has a tendency to do that no matter what it touches. But when you have this transit of Uranus and Taurus, and specifically Taurus, moving into its own second house, it's totally going to be about developing these new talents. And so you want to recognize that if it comes via a resource upset, okay, you invest in the stock market and it decides to, get cut in half for some reason, whatever it is, again, any resource upsets or any upsets in the material world are going to be opportunities to deepen self-worth. This is Uranus and Taurus in general. And this is emphasized with the second house transit. And it means that we need to develop that self-worth regardless of the outer world. Self-reliance, inner security. And of course, there will be some examples that we have to learn how to create resources in the consensus world. Doesn't matter where our state of consciousness is, individuated, spirituated, you still live in the consensus world. You participate on planet Earth in the consensus world. And yes, sometimes we want to be able to have healthy boundaries with consensus values or consensus judgments and actions, but we live in the consensus world. There may be those who have not wanted to put in necessary efforts to create resources. And so sometimes the resource upsets will mean that. And again, I use the word resources rather than just money. I use the word resources rather than your material possessions. I use the word resources to include all of the above. Money gets lumped in with it. So you everywhere I use the word resource, cross it out, put the word money if you want. Of course, what we will have here relative to the fact that the polarity is not only Scorpio, but is also the 8th house, there can be various degrees or levels of relationship confrontations to expose our insecurities and codependencies. We can still want to just go into our little shell with this house transit. And we can only withdraw and live in isolation for so long before the universe, Jeffrey Green's teachings would always say that Venus is relativity. We relate to ourself, Taurus. We relate to others, Libra. We relate to our environment, Taurus. We relate to the world. It's just, we don't learn in isolation. And so there will be a necessity here with this house transit to evolve relationship intimacy. We have to be willing to risk in an intimate relationship without a guarantee that it will last until death us do part. So here again, as we kind of mentioned earlier, there can be all kinds of sexuality issues that come up. This house transit is going to be learning to self-reliance with self-sex. And yet, there's a reason why there's 2 genders. It's for the survival of the species and the evolution of the species. The immune systems evolve faster when we replicate via 2 genders versus 1 gender self-replicating. And so, what is it we need to evolve on a sexual level? With ourself first, and then evolving that into an intimate relationship. How do we look at all of the distortions of the Scorpio polarity, which can be manipulation or possessiveness, the obsessive compulsive that Scorpio polarity can do? That happens relative to the degree we are insecure. The more insecure we are, the more controlling and possessive we have to be. The more secure we are, the less controlling we have to be. And that's what's going to open up with Uranus for awakening and growth with this house transit. So there may be the need to have a more equitable role in relationships, a more fairness of giving and receiving equally, which, by the way, was also true for the first house with the 7th house polarity. Again, it can become even more intensified with the 2nd house and 8th house polarity if we haven't learned that self-reliance. The partner can leave us and throw us in upon ourselves if we're too codependent. We can do that to a clingy partner. So, and then the other thing here is really learning how to equally share resources. Taurus is self-resources. Scorpio is shared resources. Traditional astrology looks at Scorpio in the 8th house as sex, death, and taxes. So yes, you can see that type of thing coming. Ultimately, there could be a possibility of death with this house transit, or 8th house polarity, the partner could die. But it doesn't mean that everybody's going to die. I'm still here, and Uranus has moved on into my 3rd house. So, but the whole end of life issues can come through this house transit. But we also, back to the resources, self-resources, shared resources, and the whole, inheritance thing can happen here. So can the estate taxes happen here. But in more, general, more common terms, it really is learning how to share resources with another. We all will survive better together. There's a reason why our species has come through eons of time living together in groups of people. Many species will do that. We survive better together. So, where are issues around the sharing of resources coming up for you with this transit? Where is it coming up when, say, if you're in a relationship and you have a very controlling partner who manipulates you with money? I will give you money if you XYZ. Who of us doesn't wonder about this type of a situation happening with the two people who are occupying the White House as President and First Lady? So it may not always be to that visibility or that extreme, but there's going to be all kinds of scenarios in which the resource inequality or control or fears, the sharing of resources will come up in some way. And then we have to look at what's necessary to evolve it. Perhaps on one of the ultimate levels is the revolving of resources. That hoarding through fear that Taurus can do has to open up to go, oh, I will put it out there so it comes back to me multiplied. I will put it out there so that it comes back to me in better and better ways. I like to say with Taurus in the 2nd house, whatever gets wiped away, you can create even better yet. So, in regards to the distortions, the minimal efforts, the laziness, the inertia gets a lot stronger with this house transit. The manipulations, possessiveness we spoke about, the withdrawal, the hermits, the hoarding. We can go into being extremely materialistic here. There's going to be a scandal or two around, resources and hedonism and excess possession of these. Who knows how they'll come about. There will be a scandal or two in which somebody who stole money and resources is going to get exposed, perhaps arrested or jailed. I think this is going to be, the bottom line for Donald Trump is that, he has been quite the manipulator with money and resources. I was reading another article where 6 Trump condos in the Fort Lauderdale area. He went into development with another guy, and they put in 6 luxury condos. And so, Trump is all about branding his names and his name, the Trump name, and he gets money from it. In and of itself, nothing wrong with it. However, for these condos, I mean, the best that the research could come up with, and this was some journalistic research in some magazine or publication, over 100 Russians have, invested into these condos, and those were the only ones they could find because they used their individual name. Let's just say out of these 6 buildings, there were 1,000 units, and most of them were LLCs, so you don't know who bought into it. Those types of extremes with gaming the system and abusing resources will be exposed in various individuals with Uranus and Taurus. All right, so those are my 2 slides. I'm going to get a drink of water while we bring our volunteer back on. She does not have Uranus transiting into the 2nd yet, but it's probably raising some ideas. Are you there, Leroy?
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. All right, he kept himself muted. So we don't have this house transit going on yet, my dear, but I'm sure that, excuse me, this might be giving you some ideas of what could be coming up in regards to yourself, in regards to, for you at your age, okay? You're not
Mm-hmm.
you're not anywhere near wanting to retire. I would be looking at Uranus through Taurus first house the next 3 years as building your business so that when it goes into the 2nd house, perhaps you can see some fruits of your labors. Perhaps you may find yourself going into partnership with someone else. Maybe you need more employees because you've got more work coming along.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Not and let me just, I always like to look at, okay, worst case scenario, best case scenario. I always go back, I always go to both sides rather than, pretend to even think I know what it is or what will
Mm-hmm.
happen. It could be that you do your legal work for 3 years and you burn out and you just, maybe you saved up money and you have to take a little break and you want to cocoon on the beach for a little while. Maybe you shift into being an artist, because one of the things that you have to remember, and again, what we try to take the entire chart into consideration here, okay? We have an Aries ascendant and Jupiter on the ascendant. There is a need for continual change and excitement. And I wouldn't judge yourself too harshly with, feeling like I go, relationships last 2 years and then I go on. You've got to have a partner who's willing to evolve and grow as much as you. And that's a little kinder, gentler. Maybe the relationship makes it that long and ends at this time period, or maybe this relationship doesn't work out and you spend a little time by yourself and you maybe settle down into a relationship with someone at this point who really can, Uranus opposing Neptune, okay, who really can kind of meet you as an equal in the spiritual realm. Who knows? But, being a fifth house Pluto and with Uranus balsamic, the balsamic conjunction, for those who don't know this, is like a Pisces side of a conjunction. You have to surrender. And you bring up the past to resolve it, to heal it, and sometimes then you let it go. And so why fifth house is fixed modality, that Uranus balsamic Pluto adds more flexibility, as well as the Pluto in Virgo generation. So there's, again, more flexibility, more adaptability. So Uranus and Taurus will continue the entrepreneurialism. It will continue you feeling I am my own resource. I can create what I need and want for myself. We just don't know if the Uranian topsy-turvy will bring a shift in the work, an expansion in the work, another job altogether. Time will tell. You've got some, markers of how to do it. I would also say that with this house transit, if there are any creative yearnings to open up to something else as well, go for it. Again, I tell people with long transits through this house, you will learn new talents that you will carry forward on a soul level that can come to fruition in another lifetime or two. Uh-huh. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I am, when I was seeing the distortions in the second house, I'm feeling some of those distortions actually at this time. I'm feeling some lack of movement, basically lack of ambition in my law business and wanting to break away from that. So I broke away from the law firm I was at, intending to, have my own law business, and that's what I'm doing. But now I just want to break away from that as well, and so I'm feeling really sluggish in my business right now. And maybe it's just a little phase. Maybe I'll get past that, but I really want to break out and do something creative.
Mm-hmm.
It's being in a lawyer frame of mind, not creative for me. You have to look at everything is black and white. These are the laws. This is the way things are. And to get over into the creative side of my brain takes some time. I have found that being an attorney, I am becoming a person that I don't really like that much. As far as if I met myself, I would think, well, this person is really logical and cold and not very creative. So I really need to pull in that creative side. And so seeing the distortions on the second house, I felt like I am experiencing some of those at this time.
It may be a little bit of two sides, one side, 2 feet on each side, or one foot on each side. Let me just for a moment say, you've had transiting Neptune going back and forth over Chiron, across your Pluto polarity point. I want to do what I came here to do, but it's also been saying I need to spend a little time working on healing myself. But you also have transiting Neptune moving into its own house, 12th house in Pisces, which just inside this 12th house can have confusion coming along and another emphasis on cocooning. And it's making a trine to your natal Neptune, and that will be more exact next year. And so there is a part here that can influence the laziness of Uranus when it goes into Taurus. So you may need to really make that consistent effort through this first house. And then when Uranus gets into Taurus, reevaluate. Again, all your values will be coming up. I don't need to make this much money if I simplify my life and live in a smaller place or share, a place with other people or someone else or, blah, 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 blah. So there may need to be that consistent effort. Now, it's possible that Uranus and Taurus can help you with that step by step by step process moving forward. So you've got to have your feet kind of in the real world, Taurus, in one area, while you are having all of your creative side and metaphysical side activated and wanting to do something with it. All right. So I would say that you need to give yourself enough time in a week that you're working creatively as you having to maintain living in the mundane world, okay? And as Uranus moves through Taurus and then hits this second house, it could create, again, some type of career shift or some type of simplification due to changing values that lets you live with less, that then lets you open up and whatever's happening creatively, whether it's your glass work or whether it's something else in the metaphysical world, that allows you to have more and more of that as time goes by than, feeling like you've got to be in the mundane world all the time. You've got to, I'd say, be able to walk the balance of both of them right now.
Okay.
Now, the Aquarius, one of the things that we know, again, as we said, the future-orientated messages, you pay attention to the element of repetition. The more the message pops up again, 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 that's where you're meant to go in the near future. What can happen with this much Aquarian energy is you can get messages about the future, but you don't get the timing of them. And you can get a vision of something you're going to be doing 20 years from now. And it can sometimes be confusing with Uranus. Well, I had the vision. Why isn't it manifesting? Uranus taps into the individuated unconsciousness, but it doesn't tap in with the Saturn space-time stamp on it. And so if you get one of those future-orientated visions, but it only happens once or twice, it can be way in the future. And so the, healthiest way to address that is to go, well, there's my hope. There's my goal. There's what I'm going to plan for. Especially with all your Aquarian energy, honey. You work to make Uranus and Taurus your friend. Okay? And what can happen is in this first house, it may be sporadic. And when Uranus gets into that second house, it may steady you. Oh, this is what it's like to be on planet Earth. This is what it's like to be in my body. This is what it's like to, live day in, day out, day in, day out. Well, how do I want to do that? What's important to me? And the more that you find that inner peace with yourself, Uranus, Taurus in the second house, inner peace. That's what self-reliance gives us. I'm okay in my world and I'm okay with me. then it can allow you to go over to that 8th house and make a drastic change if you want, or even make a commitment again to someone else. Raising questions?
Well, that clears some things up. You know, of course, when I get future-oriented message, I get really impatient. You know, I want to do everything now.
Mm-hmm.
So the understanding that I don't have a time date stamp, that's helpful. That is helpful.
Again, if it comes up once or twice, we say it's either fantasy, wishful thinking, or it's way down the road. If the future-orientated message, clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, comes up again, 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 that's where you're meant to go in the next 6 months, year, 2 years. With you having this much Aquarius in your chart, you're going to be more orientated towards getting the future message, whether it's long-term or short-term. And that Aries, that Jupiter and Aries square the nodes, you know, again, you get impatient and you don't always want to make the necessary efforts. And this is what Uranus is teaching you as it moves through not only the 1st house, but into Taurus and the 2nd. It is teaching you to consistently make the effort to move forward with your life. It's trying to help you with that spontaneity and excitement and channel it into effort. Make sense?
What you're saying makes
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Let me check in with Leroy, see if we have questions or comments from anybody. He might just be silent. And I'll check in with you, volunteer, see if you have any other comments, questions.
Well,
The board's been pretty quiet. I'm sorry, Robin, I interrupted you, but the board is quiet. So yeah, I'll turn it over to you ladies.
Okay. Go ahead, sweetie. You.
Well, I'm just observing that this breaking free, and then first there's breaking free and the excitement of that. And then there's a time of not really any excitement where work just has to be done. And I guess it's the lack of excitement that just makes me impatient.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, with your Jupiter square the nodes, you could have had some past history of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as we say. And then all of a sudden you re-traumatize yourself with all that Aquarian energy. And so learning some consistent effort can be something that is helpful for you, and understanding that.
Right. And so I think another thing that would be helpful in this time, in this transition, is to make a goal, to have something out there, even if there's not a message coming in, a future-oriented message, to come up with a goal.
Exactly. Look at how you made the goal to move to Hawaii, and you did it. It's quite possible that you're feeling a little floundering, okay, because you achieved that, So now what? And of course, Uranus transiting through the first house currently still wants that excitement. Uranus and Taurus might be your friend. Okay?
Right.
And as it, yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to observe that it might be just a temporary. I'm kind of sensing the sound of like things not progressing quite as fast as they usually do for these Aquarian types. But you know, that Mars Saturn transit is right over her natal Mars Saturn in the 10th house, so it might be bringing up perhaps some of the suppression issues from childhood.
The Mars Saturn transit, the Mars Saturn conjunction is over her south node.
That's what I'm saying. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Over her south node. So that's bringing up the past life memory of some of these restrictions, let's call them, you know, about moving forward.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Yep, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, hopefully, yeah, it's just Mars is conjunct Saturn in Capricorn, everybody, and it is getting ready. Saturn's going to turn retrograde April 17th at about 9 degrees Capricorn. So it is sandwiched smack dab right in between her 10th house cusp and the south node in Capricorn 10th. And so it can feel a little heavy with responsibility right now versus the excitement and the creativity. And yes, as Saturn goes retrograde and moves back into the 9th house, it might be a little relief from that. Mars will go forward in the 10th for a couple of months. And you're going to have your Mars, you're going to have Mars in your 10th house of career for the next 7-8 months, because it's going retrograde this summer from 9 Aquarius to 28 Capricorn. Mars is going to go retrograde over your Mercury twice or 3 times. So yeah, there's a lot of career stuff that's being asked of you. And, you know, putting out your own business is kind of like, you know, taking on more responsibility. And that kind of wars against that Uranian freedom of Uranus transiting through the first house. So here again, if you can apply some consistent effort, Uranus in Taurus, when it hits the second for you, could give you some personal freedom. It could give you some resource freedom if you want to make that effort with Mars up here throughout this year. Okay?
Yes, that's my goal now.
Yep.
To make the effort.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I thank you, volunteer. I'll let everyone else, if anybody else has to say anything or they can speak up. I do have a couple more things that I just want to say with the 8th house polarity, and not so much for your chart, volunteer, but because we're visually looking at a chart, okay, with that 2nd and 8th. There can also be, again, with Uranus, there can be upsets in relationships that throw us in upon ourselves with partners confronting us. It can be, again, as we spoke earlier, a partner who's so controlling that we've just got to break free and be by ourselves. Or if we're so codependent on the partner can have triangle on us and we're thrown in upon ourselves. So you've really got to be deepening self-reliance here. And again, to the degree that you learn how to just break away. 8th house. 8th house is fixed water. And so the emotional energy will build up until we have the Plutonian explosion emotionally. And in intimacy, it's the betrayals of trust. It's the love triangles. It's the abandonment. It is abandoning the partner. And, if we have relationship upsets with this second house, eighth house polarity transit, we want to work on our own self-reliance and our honesty with partners as much as we possibly can to minimize the Plutonian upsets, the confrontations that can happen from the eighth house. I mean, it can even go to the point where we're in a relationship and the partner leaves the planet and passes away on us. And if that happens, then it's there for us, again, to deepen self-reliance in some way. So with this transit, what you want to be saying is, I don't want to control anybody else, and I don't want anybody else to be controlling of me. I want to be free, Uranus, to be who I am, to be in my own comfort, in my inner peace, in my world. And I want my intimate partner to be the same way. I want my intimate partner to be working on his or her self-reliance and inner peace. So we can come together and deeply bond as equals, rather than playing any and all of the control, manipulation, etc. games. It will mean also, if we're in intimate relationship, that we want to be in charge of our own resources in some way. And again, scenarios can be everywhere. It can be each of you working and deciding how you evenly share resources or the expenses of your budgets together. There will be those that sometimes maybe, when Uranus crossed over into my second house, and I had this new job opportunity as an independent contractor, just landed my lap. It came through an old karma mate who was responsible for my death a few lifetimes ago. And he came into my life only long enough to really work through some of the control and abuse karma, and then just long enough to go, oh, by the way, would you be interested in doing this opportunity for work with me? And we were going to do it together. That didn't last longer than a few months. He didn't last in that work longer than a year or two. He was just like in my life and out of my life long enough to bring in this job opportunity. So there may be, some karmic resources that a partner owes someone with this house transit. It is possible with this house transit that we may owe resources to a partner in some way. And it's just going to see what Uranus brings up into consciousness as to where we feel we're at, how we feel, things are going to go through with that. Now, I would say again, specific to this volunteer's chart, looking at, this polarity and then looking at the fact that Uranus and Taurus second is going to square all these Aquarian planets. This person is really searching for a friend, an equal friend. There's, the Aquarian lovers is 5th house Leo, friends are Aquarius 11th house. In natural law, friends become lovers, and when they've done with their lessons, the lovers go back to friends. It's the way we naturally do it. And so with intimacy on the deepest levels, because 8th house is the soulmates, okay? We want to turn karma mates into soulmates here. But that doesn't mean we forget about friendship. And I have a tendency to say with clients is that, when you're looking to go forward in relationships, it's companionship, friendship, intimacy in that order. And if it's love at first sight and instant attraction, red flag, karma. Companionship, the activity is more important than the person. Friendship, the person becomes more important than the activity. And when you have a foundation of companionship and friendship, then intimacy has something to fall back on when the lessons show up. And so, with all of this energy and Uranus going, through this second house, it really is to be your own friend and then to have a lover who can also be your best friend. That's ultimately what you would be looking for as this second house transit comes upon you in a few years. Okay. Comments or questions? Volunteer? Anybody on the board? We'll move on.
Well, I just thought I'd add to that, because that transit is going to be opposing this Neptune and Scorpio generational soul, that can bring up a lot of, well, I think Neptune and Scorpio is just such an interesting dynamic in the whole thing because, there can be a combination of unconsciously trying to control other people. There can be a lot of self-sacrifice in a relationship or a partnership with others. So there's confusion regarding sexuality and what you really want to desire. There's a lot of push-pull in that Neptune and Scorpio generation. And that's going to be right opposing this Uranus and Taurus ingress. And suffice it to say that Jupiter and the Moon are right there as well, temporarily, albeit temporarily, but that's kind of powering up that Neptune and Scorpio in the 8th house in this natal chart.
Yeah, Jupiter's having to get its voice in the picture too, isn't it? All right, well, Volunteer, thank you very, very much for letting us look at your chart. And it's just been a pleasure connecting and catching up on you and your world.
Yes, well, thank you. This was a great opportunity.
Oh, you are so most welcome. And I wish you all the best and patience with yourself.
Okay, we'll try.
Aloha, Yuhane, Robin. Nice to connect with you again.
Yes, you too. Aloha and thank you.
Yeah. All righty. All right, we're moving on. So one more time, thank you, Volunteer. And so, hey, we're going to be back in 2 nights. We have volunteers for the 3rd house and 4th house. Leroy, I don't remember which houses we still have open. Do you? He's got to unmute himself again.
Only the 10th house. We have one opening for live
spot.
soul, 10th house transit, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, sweetie. And then finally, I just want to tell you guys, Saturn went into Capricorn late December. It's going to be there for about 3 years in and out with retrogrades. And so we have the archetype cycles together as one part, and then you can get your own individual house or all 3 houses if you want. And then, of course, we just finished up Chiron. And so we have part 1, which is archetypes and cycles. You can get your own individual house transits or the whole works as well. So thank you very much, everybody. And I will see you Wednesday evening, Uranus and Taurus transiting through the 3rd and 4th houses. Thank you very much, everyone.